This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Rebecca Larson, and I am joined today by my friend Sharon Bennett Connolly. Welcome.
You. Hello again.
I always feel like it's been forever, but every time that we reconnect, it feels like it was just yesterday, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It's always so lovely chatting with you, Rebecca. It's great fun.
I know we were just saying off the air about how we feel like we've known each other forever, and it's only been in recent years that we've been able to see each other. I love it. That's the thing I love about history, is just connecting with people all over the world who have similar interests.
Definitely. And I will tell your listeners, we've just literally spent about the last 15 minutes laughing.
This is what happens. We can't help it. It's like, it's hanging out with friends. That's what I get to do. I feel very lucky.
It's great fun. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Well, today we're going to talk about a fun topic, because this is something you've been researching and writing about for quite some time, and that is medieval princesses, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I started writing about them when I wrote my first book, Heroines of the Medieval World. There were a good number of princesses in there. And then my most recent book that will come out in the UK at the end of this month and in the US at the end of May is Princesses of the Early Middle Ages, Royal Daughters of the Conquest. So that's the princesses from 1066 to King John's daughters. And then
exciting.
The next one's out in August, which is Princesses of the Later Middle Ages. So yeah, loads of princesses.
Wow. You've done so much writing that you can put out 2 books in that short of a time period.
Yeah, well, I was a bit naughty. It was supposed to be 1 book, but it was literally way too long. When I sent it into my editor, it was like 150,000 words, and I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I couldn't shorten it. And she was like, let's split it in 2. And I thought, thank God for that, because if she asked me to actually cut 30,000 words, I don't know where I'd start. Then split it in 2, and then I'm like, actually, I've got a few more 1,000 words to play with now, so I can flip
oh my gosh.
some bits out that I actually originally thought I couldn't. So it was, so I've got two decent sized books coming out on princesses. I mean, luckily, I tell myself that at least, I mean, the original, when I started writing the book, the idea was to do an updated version of Mary Ann Everett Green's Lives of the Princesses of England. And she wrote 6 volumes. So to actually just do 2 volumes, I think I've done all right.
I have to ask you, I feel like the terms medieval and Middle Ages are interchangeable, and I don't quite understand is there a difference between the 2?
I've never found one. It's just the Middle Ages comes from, there were a series of books where they're actually, medieval encompasses the whole period. With the Middle Ages, you can have the High Middle Ages and the Low Middle Ages. So it splits the period up.
Okay.
If you can split the period up using the Middle Ages, whereas with medieval, you've got the whole period.
Yeah.
So, and it actually sounds better. Princesses of the Middle Ages sounds better than princesses of the medieval got to period, you know. It's like, period's got other connotations, so you don't want to use that.
Yeah. And it feels a little wordy then.
Yeah, it feels a bit more, whereas Middle Ages sounds a bit better. So, and it means the same thing practically. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I've always wondered that. I'm like, does it matter which one that you use? I guess I always tend to go towards medieval, but I don't write about it like you do, so that makes it.
Well, the original idea of the book, the original title was The Medieval Princess. And then it's changed to Princesses of the Middle Ages. So.
Yeah, when you wrote 2 books in one, they had to change it. Well, let's talk about this subject, because I feel like it really is something, the medieval period is something that I'm not well versed on. I feel like I am just a spectator, and a lot of what I know generally comes from historical fiction or just from doing interviews with medieval historians. So what exactly does it mean to be a princess in the medieval period?
Well, the whole inspiration was this book for the book was the meme. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like my daughter told me I should treat her more like a princess. So I married her off to a stranger for to peace with Poland.
That's right.
And it's like, and that's the attitude and the vision most people have of the medieval princess, that she's this little jewel who is just married off to a foreigner that she's never met and is never thought of again. It's like, send her off to a stranger and that's it. That's your life. Get on with it. And there's the thought is that they're never seen again or something, but it's not exactly the case. The idea was that these girls were the first permanent diplomats. The idea was they were sent to foreign courts with a job. Their job wasn't just, it was to be the wife of the ruler, but it was also to be the diplomat, to be that diplomatic link between her homeland and her new husband. And how they talk about back channels when they're talking about diplomats these days. She was the back channel. If normal diplomatic relations didn't work, then father could write to daughter and say, have a word with your husband, sweetheart. We really need to sort this piece out. And brothers could do the same, dear sister, talk to your husband, let's get this sorted. And they had a duty and a responsibility, and they were trained practically from birth. They knew that this was going to be their job. They weren't given a choice. This was their future, and they were trained to it. And most of them, the ones that went down that road, were very, very good at it. They knew their job and they did it well.
So in some instances where these daughters were born and betrothed from a very early age, were they raised with political ideas already in mind for this marriage that they were going to make in the future? Like, was it like, you're going to marry the king of this country or the prince of this country, and they feel this way, but I want you to do this? Was there anything like that?
It was more like they were raised in what England expected of them and in the policies of England rather than of their future country, because the idea was that they look after England's interests, both militarily, financially, trade-wise. Everything was to look after England's interests. And the good ones could do that as well as looking after the interests of the country that they married into.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, there are several instances in the historical records. There's a princess, I think it was Edward the Third's daughter, Joan, who was going to marry a Spanish prince. She didn't in the end because she died of plague. But a few years before the marriage was to take place, she actually interceded for a Spanish trader in wine, and obtained permissions for him to trade in England as a sign that she was looking after the interests of her future countrymen.
Yeah.
Rather,
So some of these princesses had some agency.
yeah, all princesses had agency. There were things they could do. I think the good ones knew when to use it and when not to use it. They knew where. I mean, most of them could get their fathers wrapped around their little fingers. Edward III was famous for being manipulated by his daughter. So was Edward I, actually, thinking about it. So they knew how, but it was that they would pick their time. If they did need to manipulate things, they knew the good ones knew when to press their own agency and pick which fights were worth it. You know, there's the one, the prime example is Joanna Plantagenet, Henry II's daughter and Richard the Lionheart's sister. Okay. And after her first husband, William of Sicily, died, she joined Richard the Lionheart on the Third Crusade as a companion to his wife Berengaria. Now, Richard was trying to make peace with Saladin, and so he offered Joanna as a bride to Saladin's brother. And Saladin's brother was supposed to change religions and convert to Christianity for the marriage to happen. And most people think with Richard it was just a delaying tactic, actually, because he also turned around and said, but because she's a royal widow, we've got to get permission from the Pope for her to marry a Saracen. But in the end, it didn't happen anyway, because Joanna just put her foot down and said, it's not happening. I'm not doing it. You can't make me do it. So she chose when to actually say no. And you see that through many of them. They knew, they didn't always get it right and they weren't always listened to. But the ones who needed to, when they were adamant, they really were adamant.
Yeah, that you just totally answered my next question, basically about agency when it came to marriage. One of the other people that I think about, and I've been talking with Matt Lewis about this, is like Eleanor of Aquitaine. I feel like she is another one of those women who was kind of like, this is what I'm going to do.
Eleanor is a brilliant one. She was fantastic in that, she didn't have a lot of choice with her first marriage. Mm-hmm. But she did have a say in dissolving that marriage. And I think a lot of the pressure into dissolving her marriage with Louis VII came from Eleanor of Aquitaine. I think she probably turned around and said, look, he's not interested in me. If we get divorced now, he's got time to find somebody else, and so have I. Wow. And, so I think she pressed that a lot. And then once she was single, by the time she left the French court, she'd already decided who she was going to marry. Wow. And she you could see with the speed in which she married Henry of Anjou that this had all been arranged. Very secretly as well, because Henry's younger brother Geoffrey tried to kidnap Eleanor on her way back to Aquitaine. So nobody else knew that it was all organised, but those two had arranged it. And there is a story that Henry and his father had visited the French court just a year or two before. So they had a chance to communicate and to make the decision. And Eleanor knew she wasn't going to be allowed to remain single. She knew Louis VII wanted to arrange her marriage to a vassal who could be easily manipulated to whatever he wanted. Okay. So she's like, actually, if I arrange my own wedding and marriage and do it and get it done and present it to Louis VII as a fait accompli, there'll be nothing he can do about it. And she's taken her life into her own hands. And you look at Eleanor of Aquitaine and you don't have to wonder why her daughter Joanna could stand up to Richard, and her other daughters, Matilda and Leonor, were really strong women in their own marriages as well. And you look at their mother and it's like, yeah, that's why.
Yes, to have a mother like that. But one of the things that I hate about that story, obviously, is that Eleanor wasn't able to see her daughters by Louis again.
Yeah, that's really sad, because the other three daughters, remarkably, because this thing about, you marry your daughter off and she goes to a foreign land and never sees her family again. Yeah. That certainly didn't happen with Eleanor's three daughters by Henry II. Joanna well, Eleanor had brought Berengaria to Sicily to marry Richard I. So she spent a couple of days with Joanna then. And then Joanna met her again later when she came back from the Holy Land. Matilda had been married into Saxony, Henry the Lion of Saxony, from about the age of 10, I think it was, 8 or 10 or something. But Henry was exiled by the Holy Roman Emperor when he was off on crusade. He didn't want such a strong, dangerous chap in German land, so he sent him into exile. So they came to Henry II's court and to England, and at least one of Matilda's children was born in Winchester, in England, with Eleanor of Aquitaine present when her grandchild was born.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of royal mothers never get to even see their grandchildren, let alone be present when their grandchildren are born. And then, of course, with Leonor, when John wanted to make a peace with Philip II of France and didn't have any daughters of his own yet, he arranged for Philip II's son Louis to marry one of his nieces from Castile, and he sent his mum to collect her. And poor Eleanor, she was in her 80s at the time, crossing the Pyrenees in the deep, dark winter. But as a result, she spent a month with her daughter and her grandchildren in Spain before she had to bring one of the granddaughters back to France to marry the future Louis VIII. So she had, for a mother who, had to send her children, all her daughters off at very young ages, she at least got to see them as adults.
Yeah, that's sweet. I like that story. I don't know why my mind immediately goes to like Elizabeth of York and Elizabeth Woodville, because I feel like Elizabeth Woodville got a little bit of that as well, but then she kind of disappeared and was in a convent, wasn't she? Was that what it was?
Yeah, she retired to a convent, Bermondsey, I think it was. But she did get to see a lot of her younger daughters stayed with her for a while until they were married, and at least because Richard III had them declared illegitimate, they weren't royal anymore, so they didn't have marriages abroad. So they all married in England, which meant that they were around and they could visit her. But yeah, it's and we have to remember not all princesses did marry abroad. Edward I's daughter, Joan of Acre, was married first to Gilbert de Clare, and then secondly, she actually chose one of Gilbert's squires, sent him to Edward I with a request that he be knighted, and then secretly married him.
Oh my gosh.
Without Daddy's permission. While Daddy is actually arranging another marriage for her, she actually goes and marries the man she chooses. And so she stayed in England as first as Gilbert de Clare's wife and then Ralph de Mortimer's. And she was thrown in prison for a little while by Edward. Both her and Ralph. I think she was kept under house arrest and Ralph was thrown in prison at Bristol. And she actually sent her 3 little daughters by Gilbert de Clare, had them, delivered them to Edward I to plead their mother's case.
Oh my gosh. She's like, Daddy, can you knight this guy? She's like, okay, now we can go get married. I love that.
Well, I love that she presented it. It wasn't, Daddy, can I marry Ralph? It was, Daddy, knight Ralph. Right, now I'll marry you, and then I'll tell Daddy.
Oh my gosh. I feel like getting thrown in the tower, getting locked up and put in jail is so different than what I expected the result to be, especially as a princess. To get locked up, not just like someone in the line of succession, but the daughter of a king.
Yeah, well, daughters, they could be locked up. I mean, basically, it wasn't any kind of prison that we would think about. It's like, go to your room or like,
Go to your palace room with all your fancy furnishings.
And don't come out until you ready to say sorry.
Okay, that's a good point. It was very different.
Yeah. are grown women. These girls, they're actually adults by this point with children of their own, but Dad is still, as the king, Dad is still in command.
Well, of course, right? So, okay, so here's a question that I have for you, kind of influences. Do you see any examples in your research of princesses actually influencing politics through their marriages?
A prime example, a really good one, is the daughter. Actually, two really good ones are the daughters of King John, and both are named Joan.
Oh, this won't be
One,
confusing.
one is illegitimate, Joan, who was Lady of Wales, wife of Llywelyn the Great, Aylworth, and she acted as a conduit between Wales and her dad, King John, at the height of the First Barons' War, when Magna Carta's being issued and things like that. She's tried to keep the peace between them. And there was one instance where somebody had told Llewellyn about this plot to capture and murder John. And she actually sent him a warning to not do something so that, to thwart the plot. So otherwise her dad could have been killed earlier than when he died in 1216, and things could have been a bit dicey. So she actually stopped an assassination plot.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Isn't it? And the other Joan is Joan, who was John's oldest legitimate daughter of Isabel d'Angoulême, and oh god, her life was, well, it could be a bloody comedy at times. The poor girl, she's sent at the age of 4 to Lusignan in France because she's going to marry Hugh X de Lusignan, the son of the man who was originally going to marry her mum, but John stole her from him. So she's now going to marry his son. Except then John dies. Isabel d'Angoulême is not offered a place at court or any responsibility over Henry III, and decides she'll go back to France and rule her own county of Angoulême. And then decides, actually, I'm going to marry my daughter's betrothed. She marries Hugh X and then sends a long letter to Henry III explaining why she's got to marry Hugh and not 10-year-old Joan. So no. Joan eventually is sent back to England, and Henry III's council arrange a marriage for her with Alexander II of Scotland. Even before she's actually back in England, because part of the marriage treaty says, and if she doesn't get back in time, Alexander will marry her younger sister, Isabella. But luckily, Joan got back in time. I'm saying luckily. I don't know if it's luckily or not for Joan. That she and Alexander didn't have any children. But she is a prime example of being that diplomatic link between Henry III and Alexander II. It's the longest, her marrying Alexander II and then Henry III's daughter, Joan's niece, marrying Alexander III, led to the longest period of peace between England and Scotland in medieval history. There were 70 odd years of peace because of these two marriages. And Joan, there's letters from Joan saying, we couldn't put this in the diplomatic note, but don't trust so-and-so. He hasn't got our best interests at heart. And, so these women, they knew what was going on at court. They knew who to trust, who was working against peace and who was working for peace.
Yeah. Do you think it's because they were women who were able to kind of be in a room and be unseen, that they heard things that maybe helped them?
I think it's possible. I also think it's, when you're late at night, when you've both got your heads on a pillow and your husband wants to chat about the day's business and that, you're there listening.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of medieval marriage wasn't about love. It was about a partnership and working together for the interests of the whole family. So them talking, husband and wife talking about politics and the state of peace between England and Scotland was very natural to them to actually maintain that peace, and to prevent rifts that would lead to war.
Yeah. Are there other instances? You brought up Scotland, and that made me curious because I feel like once we get to the Tudors, after Margaret Tudor, there wasn't really many marriages between England and Scotland. Were there quite a few marriages between an English princess and a Scottish king or a Scottish noble, even maybe?
Yes, there was Sibylla of Normandy, Henry I's illegitimate daughter, married Alexander I, King of Scots. Then Joan married Alexander II. Margaret, Henry III's daughter, married Alexander III. So yeah, there were. It's funny actually. When I was writing the book, I suddenly realised there's one country that no English princess married. And do you know who it is? Which country it is?
Oh
In
gosh.
medieval times, there is one country, and it's France.
Oh, that kind of surprises me.
Exactly, isn't it? It's like English princesses didn't marry French kings.
Huh.
The first one is Mary Tudor.
What?
And it's like, I keep going through it in my head thinking, am I sure? They married French counts, French dukes, a number of princesses married dukes of Brittany. And Joanna Plantagenet married the Count of Toulouse. Empress Matilda married Geoffrey of Anjou. But no one married a French prince or a French king.
Do you have a theory?
But they did circle them.
Yeah.
They did marry Castilian and Spanish princes. They married French counts and dukes who were semi-autonomous. They married into Flanders, the Holy Roman Empire. The English policy basically was to encircle France with its royal daughters. It was all about keeping France in check and arranging marriages that helped to do that.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this, understanding why, because you would think if they married in France, that would solve all their problems too. Like why encircle France?
Alternately, the French princesses married English kings.
It's like some weird double standard.
It is. And then you look at England and Scotland. English princesses married Scottish kings, but Scottish princesses didn't marry English kings except for Henry I, Matilda of Scotland. No other Scottish princess married an English king. And
Odd.
It was one of those revelations that I was writing and they're thinking, why?
This is an interesting topic because I feel like unless you're researching all of these princesses of the time, you wouldn't find that connection.
Oh, it's fascinating just looking at things like that. The English kings had certain families, certain countries that they were more than happy to send their daughters to. And you have a few anomalies like Sicily. But most of the time it's regularly, Castile, Brittany, Holy Roman Empire. We had 3 royal daughters sent into there, with Matilda marrying the emperor, the empress's granddaughter marrying Henry the Lion, and then Henry III's sister marrying the Holy Roman Emperor as well. So, I didn't even realise that. I thought there was only Empress Matilda, and it's like, oh, wow, we regularly sent a royal daughter into Germany.
Wow. I'm just fascinated by this time period. But I was like, it's not even a time period. It is like an era. It is a long period of time that we cover when we talk about medieval. And there's so many different situations happening and so many families involved that sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming when I just primarily study the Tudors.
Because it's one of those things as well where you have to do it with a family tree in your hand. And the new books have have got the family trees for both the Daughters of the Conquest and the Plantagenets, so that you can follow it all the way through.
Nice.
Even if you've with the first book, you can see what goes on afterwards, and with the second book, you can see where it all comes from. So, because originally it was like, my editor said, "Are you putting both family trees in there? Because, you know, one book's about one and one's about the other." And I said, "Yes."
Good. That'll be so helpful.
Yeah.
Especially when there's a million Matildas and Margarets.
Oh, don't. My new joke is Henry I walks into a room and shouts, "Matilda!" and all the girls turn around and say, "Yes."
Yeah, exactly. He just
His
gets
mum, his wife, his legitimate daughter, 3 illegitimate daughters, a sister, and at least 2 nieces were all called Matilda for Henry I. I mean, it's just like, "Matilda!" and everybody turns around and says, "What?"
Yeah, really, real original in naming your children there. Like, well, we'll just stick with Matilda. It seems to be working right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about princesses misbehaving, and you kind of hinted at Joan, the wife of Llywelyn. Is that how you say it, Llywelyn? I never know how to say these Welsh names.
Helen. I wait until Nathan Amin comes on, and then I get him to pronounce everything.
Yeah, I'm trusting you. You live much closer to Wales than I do. But I want to talk about her a little bit, and because obviously, as you mentioned, she is the illegitimate daughter of King John. He kind of talked a little bit about how that shaped her role in Welsh politics.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly? Can you talk about this affair that she had?
It's remarkable, isn't it? The idea of a woman being caught in the bedroom with another bloke, and by her husband. And basically what happened was, I think it was William de Breos was captured by Llywelyn and held prisoner. Then he was released. And Llywelyn and de Breos arranged a marriage between Llywelyn and Joan's son Dafydd and Breos's daughter Isabella. And Breos was visiting the Welsh court in order to finalise the arrangements for the wedding. And Llywelyn and Breos and Joan were found in her bedroom. Mm-hmm. Now, we automatically think it was an affair, and Llywelyn went furious, hanged Breos from the nearest tree, and imprisoned Joan for about a year.
Oh.
Whether or not it was an affair or a one-night stand, or actually something more sinister, we don't know. Breos may have forced himself on Joan. In those days, even if it was a rape, it would have been seen as Joan's fault.
Yeah.
You know how women still get blamed today for assaults on themselves. So it's like, we don't know even if it was a love affair or if it was an assault. And novelists tend to portray it as a love affair. I think it was Dana Messer, who wrote Joan's biography, who suggested it could be something a lot less romantic. Mm. And as she suggested it, I'm there thinking, you know what? Llywelyn imprisoned her for a year, and then loosened the terms of her imprisonment, and eventually welcomed her back to court with full honours. So maybe he knew more than the chroniclers suggested, and there was, something more sinister in Breos's actions. Or maybe Llywelyn needed Joan to keep the peace between him and her brother Henry III, because she was one of the leading diplomats in relations between England and Wales. And in all the summits between England and Wales, especially during Henry III's reign, Joan is the leading person doing the talking. So it may be that just Llywelyn needed Joan, or it may be that she wasn't as at fault as Breos was. What I find really surprising, interesting, is that as soon as he'd hanged Breos, Llywelyn started writing letters to Breos's wife saying, look, I've hanged your husband, but I still want this wedding to go ahead. So can we sort it, please? And it did. David married Isabella de Breos. And it's like, what an inauspicious start to a marriage. Your husband's dad killed your dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, can you imagine Sunday dinner around the dinner table?
I can't
How are you
even.
doing, Isabella? I'm fine, thank you, Llywelyn. I was just thinking about my dad, but never mind.
But never mind, carry on. Yeah, it's awkward to say the least.
Awkward much.
Yeah, I guess it's hard sometimes to wrap your mind around the medieval mind. And
It is. And
how
it's
they
hard
thought.
sometimes because we don't have the personal links, you know, we don't have we don't have how any woman thought about anything in medieval times. You know, it's not written down. They didn't write diaries. Nobody wrote from the woman's point of view. So we can only assume how they felt.
Yeah.
And, you know, these princesses were in some really awkward situations sometimes. And when you put yourself in their head and in their place, it's like, oh my God, I am so glad I'm here now.
Yeah. As much as we want to,
years ago.
as much as we want to be a princess and wear a tiara, we don't want to live during that time. We are in a much better place today, even though sometimes we might not necessarily think we are.
Exactly. It's like, oh God, poor sods.
You had mentioned to me another misbehaved woman, and I would love for you to talk about Eleanor de Montfort. Is that how you say her name? I don't know how to say any of these names.
Yes, no, Eleanor de Montfort. I think I said the other day she's probably my least favourite of the princesses, and then I qualified it. Actually, it's her husband I don't like. I'm not a fan of Simon de Montfort, so I sort of Eleanor gets the blame for that, basically, which is really mean on my part. She was the youngest daughter of King John and Isabel d'Angoulême. It's possible she was born after John's death, that she was a posthumous daughter. Nobody seems to have an exact birth date for her. And she was married at the age of 8 to William Marshall II, the son of the great William Marshall. But then he died when she was about 15.
Oh.
And she took an oath at that age of chastity. She say that she'd never marry again and she would dedicate her life to God. She didn't join a monastery and she didn't take full nun's vows, but she swore an oath of chastity at 15 and saying, you know, I'm never going to marry again. Apparently her governess persuaded her to it. And then she's at her brother's court, Henry III, and along comes Simon de Montfort, you know, this rather dashing knight who is rather in need of money and has already tried to marry a couple of rich widows who both refused him. So he's now looking for a bride who could actually give him his fortune, and him is Eleanor. And she's like, oh my God, Simon, aren't you gorgeous? And he's like, because I've got the idea of a 15-year-old girl swearing chastity, you know, at 15. It's like, you know, teenage love, isn't it? Oh my God, I'm never going to marry again. I'll never find anyone. Right, that's it. I am swearing off men. Oh, Simon de Montfort. I've changed my mind.
Yeah, I spoke too soon.
Like, oh my God, now I've got this dreadful oath around my neck and I want him.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, and apparently she, either she or Simon told Henry that they needed to marry. suggesting they didn't say the words outright, apparently, but suggesting that she was pregnant, so they'd better get married in a hurry. So Henry arranged for them to secretly marry, and then told Simon, right, you better get off to the Pope and have that pesky oath of chastity removed and permission granted for her to marry you, seeing as you're married. And
Yeah.
and it's like, and then he discovers actually she wasn't pregnant because the baby doesn't arrive for 10 months. And Simon, while he's abroad in Italy, trying to persuade the Pope to dissolve Eleanor's oath, he borrows money using Henry as his guarantor without actually asking Henry any permission. Or even telling him, apparently, because then Henry gets a letter from the bloke who'd lent the money to Simon saying, oh, Simon hasn't paid me, so you had better. And Henry's like, what?
I did what now? That's the worst son-in-law ever.
Well, now he's brother-in-law, but and this all comes out at the churching of Eleanor of Provence after the birth of the future Edward I. Henry discovers that he's been named as the guarantor for Simon's loans. And then he has this big row with Simon and says, and you told me you had to marry my sister, and that obviously wasn't true. Get out of my sight, get out of England. And he sends them both into exile.
Oh, my gosh.
And they have to flee England so quickly that they can't even collect their son on the way.
Wow, that seems
so
serious.
Henry was furious.
Definitely seems like, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So then, of course, Simon de Montfort we are talking about the Simon de Montfort, the man who actually manages to raise a rebellion against Henry III and incites the Second Barons' War and forms Parliament and, takes the king in prison at the Battle of Lewes in 1264, but then is killed and practically dismembered at the Battle of Evesham in 1265. And in all this time, Eleanor supports Simon rather than her brother. So, and Simon's, like I said, I'm not a fan of Simon because he's there complaining. His whole argument that starts the Barons' War is that he doesn't like the foreigners at court. There's first the Queen's family, the Savoyards, come to seek positions. Then after the death of Isabella of Angoulême, Henry III's half-siblings come to England to seek financial positions and good marriages and titles. And Simon gets a bit jealous. Simon actually forgets the fact that he's also an immigrant from France who came seeking the earldom of Leicester that was his grandmother could have had. So, it's like hypocritical much. And of course, they've got 4 or 5 sons by this point who all need some income and some lands. And Simon he's got the earldom of Leicester, but he hasn't got the lands to go with it because they belong to the Earl of Winchester, who got there first. And Eleanor de Montfort's she's got a part of the Marshall inheritance because she's a widow. She's got her widow dower from the Marshalls. But the one problem with the Marshalls is there were 5 sons of William Marshall, and not one of them had a son of his own, but they all got married and they all had wives once they died who needed a third of the Marshall lands to sustain them for the rest of their lives. And the Marshall lands were getting whittled away by all these widows.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So it's like, you just look at it and you think, wow. But poor Eleanor in the end, of course, Simon loses at the Battle of Evesham. She holds Dover Castle for a little while, sends her sons over to the continent with the family jewels and as much money as she could get together before she herself did eventually agree with Henry III that she'd leave England and never come back. And she settled in Montargis in France with her daughter, who was also called Eleanor, just to, confuse things.
Yeah.
But she did finally make peace with Edward I when he became king. He actually visited her on the way back from Crusade in about 1374. And it was his aunt, Marguerite of Provence, Eleanor of Provence's sister, who acted as intermediary to broker a peace between Edward and Eleanor de Montfort and heal the family rift. But it's like, you have an argument with your brother or your sister and you just, it might turn to fisticuffs, but that's it. Henry III has an argument with his sister and, we've got war.
Yeah, it was quite different. Yeah. When you have a lot of power, these fights escalate quickly, don't they?
Yeah.
I love these stories. They're so interesting. Well, I want to end with the daughter of Henry I. And Henry I to me is such a scoundrel. Like we always go back to the death of his brother in the forest and him leaving his brother there to grow cold so he can claim the throne. So anything that happens to Henry I, I don't feel bad for him.
I like him, though. I don't know why. I mean, I know... I feel for him in a way as well, because he had these two older brothers. One was left Normandy, one was left England, and he was left a bit of money. It's like, your dad couldn't leave you, just, Yorkshire or something. And then he got married and he had two children, William and Matilda, two legitimate children. It's like, his dad had something like 10 or 11. And he had two. And it's like, you think, all that is he was always arguing with his brothers. So he's managed to avoid doing that by just having one son. There's going to be no arguments over who inherits. That son inherits. The problem with that is that son, that's a very slim lifeline.
Yeah.
And then when that son dies in the White Ship tragedy in 1120, that's a whole other can of worms that's going to be opened up in that his daughter should eventually inherit. But then, of course, he's raised Stephen of Blois to possibly inherit because his daughter was in Germany. But daughter comes back from Germany, doesn't want Stephen to inherit anymore. But Stephen's already got these ideas of a crown in his head.
Yeah.
So, but he also has... Nobody knows exactly how many, but it's at least 20 illegitimate children.
Just a couple.
Yeah. And of which there's at least 8 daughters, 3 named Matilda. And Sibylla, who's probably one of the oldest, she marries Alexander I of Scots. Becomes a queen. That's the one who, she gets the best prize, basically. Another one marries into Brittany. Another one, Juliana, marries Eustace de Passy, who is also known as Eustace de Breteuil. And there's a problem right there in the Eustace... is one of the Norman lords, and there's always disagreements between different Norman lords. And he has a disagreement with a neighbouring lord, and they exchange hostages. And Eustace takes the other lord's son as hostage, and his 2 daughters are sent to Henry I to be held hostage for that lord, but they're with their granddad. And then for some reason, and no one seems to know why, Eustace decides to blind and castrate this hostage that he's holding. So the boy's dad goes to Henry I and says, your son-in-law has just done this to my child. You've got those 2 daughters you're holding as hostage. And, well, I want justice. And so Henry I has to hand these 2 granddaughters over to this chap, who then cuts off their noses and blinds them.
Jeez.
And it's like, but in some history books, you see it as Henry I cut off the noses and blinded his own granddaughters. And it's like, no, he didn't. But as a feudal lord, he had to allow justice to the lord who'd been wronged. Otherwise, nobody would support him. You know, he had to be seen to be doing justice, to be allowing justice, even at the expense of his own granddaughters.
Oh.
But Juliana didn't take it like that. She was a tad upset at the way her daughters had been treated, even though she'd already, you know, her husband had not been very nice to the boy.
Yeah.
And she basically rebelled against her father, tried to kill him with a crossbow bolt. And then, oops, missed Dad. Dad, tad upset, besieges the castle that she's in, and she has to escape by jumping out of a window into the moat and swimming to shore. And the chroniclers are really big on saying how indecorous she looked, with her skirts flying everywhere and her legs showing as she's jumping into the moat.
I can't. How else would you act? I feel like I would probably have done the exact same thing that she did. I probably would have been pretty upset too.
Yeah, me too. And in the end, they made peace. And father and daughter and son-in-law, daughter was allowed to go back to Britwy. Julian was allowed to go back to Britwy, and the son-in-law had to stay with Henry I for a few months to prove his loyalty.
See,
wow. You just couldn't make it up.
No, this is the thing that I keep saying, I feel like, on this show about the medieval period. Like, you think the Tudor period was full of drama? Like, no. Like, the medieval period says, hold my beer, I'll show you some drama, because there's so much drama during that extended period of time. Centuries.
Yeah.
So
and this was just the tip of the iceberg. There's girls refusing to marry, refusing to join their husbands. There was one girl who married the Count of Holland, and he went back to Holland, and she stayed with her dad for a little while and actually refused to join him. And he died anyway, so she didn't have to leave England. But she was like, no, I'm not getting on that boat. And there was another one who was due to marry in Gascony, and her dad had fitted out 5 ships to transport her there, and at the last minute she put her foot down and said, right, I am absolutely not going. And it's like, okay, fine.
I love these stories. I love learning about these women. I feel like the next time I have you on, we got to focus on 1 or 2 women. Because I feel like there's so much more to their stories that we're missing, and that we need to like do more in-depth talk about them. I don't know who those women might be. We'll talk about that off air, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I am so looking forward to your books coming out. I always want to give you the opportunity to plug everything that you're doing, everything that you've done. So please tell everybody what you've written. Tell everybody about your podcast.
Oh, let's see if I can remember. Okay, podcast is A Slice of Medieval. What I've written. Let's see if we can get them. Heroines of the Medieval World. Silk and the Sword, The Women of the Norman Conquest, which is coming out in paperback shortly. Ladies of Magna Carta, Women of Influence in 13th Century England. Defenders of the Norman Crown, The Rise and Fall of the Warren Earls of Surrey. King John's Right-Hand Lady, The Story of Nicola de la Haye. Women of the Anarchy. Yeah, that's just that. Women of the Anarchy. That's a really short title. It got me shocked, that. Heroines of the Tudor World. Scotland's Medieval Queens, from St. Margaret to Margaret of Denmark. And the next one out is Princesses of the Early Middle Ages, Royal Daughters of the Conquest, and that's followed a few months later by Princesses of the Later Middle Ages, Royal Daughters of the Plantagenets.
Yeah, so if you want to learn, if you want to learn about the medieval period, I would say maybe especially women in the medieval period, which we all love on this show, please check out Sharon's books. And, I'll include links in the show notes. I think they're all available on Amazon. Is there anywhere else that they can get them?
They are all available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. And if you want a taster, there's my blog, historyoftheinterestingbits.com, which has got some of those women are on there in articles that I wrote on them. So gives you a nice wide taster of the kind of women I write about.
Yes, I love these exciting women who get into trouble. So I'm glad that you write about them. Well, Sharon, thank you so much for joining me again today. This has been a lot of fun.
It has, very much so. Thank you, Rebecca. Again, I'm still laughing. I don't know what it is with me and you. It's just like we just sit here giggling.
It's a good time. I can't wait to have you back.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.